Good evening. You're watching World News Tonight on TVP World. I'm Aaron Darman. Forget Monroe. This is the Donroe doctrine, according to Donald Trump, the US president, using a 19th century security declaration that closed off Latin America to foreign powers to explain Washington's attack on Venezuela, and warning tonight that the Russia ally state may not be the last to face intervention from the United States. More in just a moment, but first, the latest headlines. Moscow breaks a temporary ceasefire near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear reactor. Tens of thousands are left in the dark after suspected eco-terrorist sabotage at a Berlin power plant. And we meet the oldest working Pole, aged 99. But we begin tonight with details of America's dramatic operation to strike Venezuela and capture President Nicolas Maduro in the cover of darkness. From months of planning to a rapid air and land raid on Caracas, Donald Trump told reporters it was just like watching a television show. As Ovidio Schnechea reports, that show is now a reality as Washington temporarily takes over the South American country.
Apprehended Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro was flown past the Statue of Liberty as he arrived in New York.
Possibly the president with his wife behind them.
In Drug Enforcement Administration custody, the deposed dictator seemed to remain in high spirits as he wished the agents on site a Happy New Year.
Good night. Happy New Year.
The Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, which has housed some of the most notorious defendants, is where Maduro awaits trial. Accused of running a corrupt, illegitimate government and flooding the US with illegal drugs. The rapid raid on Caracas with the aim to capture the president was codenamed Operation Absolute Resolve.
And it was an assault like people have not seen since World War II.
Donald Trump followed the operation from a situation room at his Mar-a-Lago residence in Florida, together with CIA Director John Ratcliffe and the Secretaries of State and Defense. The attack on Venezuela, which had been planned months in advance, lasted 2 hours and 20 minutes.
Over the course of the night, aircraft began launching from 20 different bases on land and sea across the Western Hemisphere. In total, more than 150 aircraft, bombers, fighters, intelligence, reconnaissance, surveillance, rotary wing were in the air last night.
The Americans switched the power off in the Venezuelan capital. And special forces moved in on what's been described as a heavily fortified military fortress of the dictator.
And he was trying to get into a safe place. You know, the safe place is all steel. And he wasn't able to make it to the door because our guys were so fast.
Not a single American was killed in the operation. Venezuelan authorities report at least 40 killed on their side. The number includes both servicemen and civilians. With Maduro gone, his vice president Delcy Rodriguez took over the reins.
We demand the immediate release of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife Celia Flores, the only president of Venezuela, President Nicolas Maduro. We are ready to defend Venezuela. We are ready to defend our natural resources.
The US says it will control Venezuela until a proper transition of power can take place.
The only way the U.S. could effectively run the country is if we're going to be using the Venezuelan police, the state administration, the military, and so forth that are already there. And so what seems to be happening is the U.S. is going to be providing some kind of umbrella over the vice president of Venezuela.
The U.S. intervention sparked panic and long lines at supermarkets as Venezuelans rushed to stock up on groceries. Armed militias were seen patrolling the streets of the country. To help the locals amid the uncertain situation, American billionaire Elon Musk has offered his Starlink satellites, thus fulfilling Maduro's promise to provide free internet for the whole country. While the future of Venezuela is unclear, the more global predictions of financial experts are optimistic.
I expect stock markets to react positively on what happened in Venezuela and on the American strikes. I also expect the commodity market, especially oil prices, to go down in the expectation by investors that there will be more oil produced out of Venezuela over the next month.
Venezuelans all over the world were seen celebrating the downfall of the dictator. hoping it will bring a better future for their country. For TVP World, Ovidiusz Nicieja.
And in the wake of the Venezuelan attack, President Trump insists American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again. In fact, he's coining the term Donroe doctrine, an expansion of the 19th century declaration by James Monroe of global spheres of influence, which warned against interference in America's backyard. So, could another state be next? Paweł Trzaskowski reports.
After these events, the world has now a new buzzword.
The Monroe doctrines.
Or rather,
They now call it the Donroe document, I don't know.
the return of this 19th century doctrine presented by the fifth president of the United States, James Monroe, was heralded in the new U.S. national security strategy.
Where the hemispheric security, the establishment of U.S. dominance in the direct neighborhood is first and foremost goal.
And in this very neighborhood,
Venezuela was on top of this agenda.
with Maduro gone, Washington sends a clear message.
The American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again. Won't happen.
What will happen, though, is Washington setting its sights on asserting control in other countries in the region, with Cuba being the next likely target.
I think Cuba is going to be something we'll end up talking about because Cuba is a failing nation right now, very badly failing nation.
But Western Hemisphere is not limited to the Americas. Greenland, an autonomous territory of Denmark in the Arctic Circle, is also on Washington's wish list.
We need it for national security. We have to have it.
That was 2 weeks ago, but this need has just been reiterated in an interview for The Atlantic. That's possibly one of the reasons why rather reserved reactions to the Venezuela operation were coming from many European countries.
The Danish government is closely monitoring the situation in Venezuela with our allies. Now is the time for de-escalation. International law must be respected.
The legal classification of the US deployment is complex. We will take our time with that. I reiterated my support for international law this morning. The UK government will discuss the evolving situation with US counterparts.
Conspicuous silence comes from Hungary, which in 2013 was the only European Union country that did not condemn Maduro's illegitimate presidency and continued to maintain ties with Venezuela. In Europe, staunch opposition to the intervention was voiced in Belarus and Slovakia, and eastwards, of course, in Russia and China, with both countries accusing the US of undermining international law. But this opposition comes from countries that are themselves permanent members of the United Nations and yet have undermined the UN Charter with the aggression on Ukraine. By crying foul, they expect the West to stick to the rules which Beijing and Moscow want immunity from. However, in Venezuela, Trump flipped the table and used the language of strength against those usually perceived as strongmen.
In terms of understanding the way these strong men think and behave and how to actually influence them, Donald Trump is right that force is the way that they respond to things.
Therefore, a spillover effect could happen now.
Anything is possible with Donald Trump as president.
But does it apply to sticking to New Year's resolutions?
Do you have a New Year's resolution? I have. Let's hear it. Peace on earth.
Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
Moving to Ukraine now, where Moscow has violated a temporary ceasefire near the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. The reactor has been out of Ukrainian hands since 2022, with Vladimir Putin reportedly insisting to US President Trump late last year that he is working with Kyiv to ensure the facility's safety. As Anastasia Yanchenko explains, some suggest America's operation in South America reveals Trump's unwillingness to crack down on the Kremlin.
Russia has once again violated an agreement, this time a temporary ceasefire near the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The breach led to the plant's 12 blackouts since the start of the full-scale war, with the previous outage occurring less than a month ago.
Russia is deliberately disabling the energy infrastructure in the occupied territories from testing the connection of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to its own power system under conditions of active combat and occupation.
The plant has been shut down since 2022, but still needs constant power to keep cooling systems running and prevent a meltdown. In December last year, Russia's technical regulator Rostech granted permission to restart one of the 6 power units at the plant, despite violations of the International Atomic Energy Agency global safety standards.
Every year of the war, Russia sets the goal of connecting at least one unit to its own system. According to Rosatom, it's a commercial facility and must operate and generate money. Otherwise, it only produces losses.
The nuclear power plant has been under Russian occupation since March 2022. Europe's largest nuclear facility has repeatedly been put at risk. Recent attacks on the nuclear power plant follow Putin's conversation with Trump, where he insisted to the US president that he is cooperating with Ukraine to ensure the power plant's safety.
He's been very good in that sense. He wants to see that open. And he hasn't hit it with missiles, hasn't hit it with anything. It's a big danger to do that for everybody.
But for Putin, connecting the power plant to the Russian energy system is more than a strategic military goal.
Zaporizhzhia could supply electricity to Russian homes, which is handy, but also it's a tangible asset that Russia has gained from this war.
But the problems don't end there. From the very first minutes of the new year, Russia struck energy infrastructure across multiple regions, including Mykolaiv, Odessa, Kherson, Kharkiv and Kyiv. Hundreds of thousands of residents were left without electricity or heat for hours amid severe winter conditions. Attacks are becoming increasingly violent. The frontline city of Kharkiv was hit on Friday, with rescue operations only completed on Sunday. A Russian ballistic missile struck a residential building, killing 5 people, including a 3-year-old boy.
As you see, there is no military infrastructure nearby.
30 people were injured and many more were left homeless.
It's gone. The apartment is gone.
I'm not thrilled with Putin. I'm not thrilled with Putin. He's killing too many people.
However, experts say Trump's dissatisfaction with Putin is nothing new.
We have seen what Trump could do if he wanted against any dictator using radical methods like in Venezuela. But we see that Trump doesn't want to, and he's not ready to use harsh measures against Russia, apart from words.
But Ukraine has learned to take harsh measures against the aggressor itself. On Sunday, Ukrainian drones disrupted the operation of Moscow's airport, forcing closures, while Ukraine regularly strikes Russian military and industrial facilities in the rear to weaken Russia's ability to continue its all-out war. Anastasia Yanchenko, TVP World.
Tens of thousands of homes in the German capital of Berlin are facing days without power as police investigate a suspected arson attack. The citywide blackout comes as temperatures hit below freezing, with a left-wing activist group claiming responsibility and calling it an act of self-defence. Susanna Jurek has more.
Snow-covered empty streets. These sites are not of a distant Arctic Circle town, but Berlin, where a reported arson attack on high-voltage cables near the Lichterfeld heat and power station left nearly 45,000 households without electricity for the foreseeable future. The responsibility for what the German police have already hailed a sabotage attack has been claimed by left-wing climate activist organization, the Volcano Group.
We have an alleged letter of confession. This must now be scrutinized. I was very deliberately attributing the offense to left-wing extremists, but now we have to scrutinize it again. The pressure to act lies with the police. I know criminal investigators are already working on this.
Extracts from the letter were published in the Tagesspiegel.
The attack on the gas-fired power plant is an act of self-defense and international solidarity with all those who protect the earth and life. Power outages were not the goal of the action, but rather the fossil fuel industry.
And this isn't the first time that Germany had witnessed the explosive activism of the Volcano Group. Twice in 2021 and 2024, they have allegedly targeted the power supply of the Tesla factory in Grunheide. A And last year, the group's activists, together with other young Germans, marched against the car manufacturer's planned expansion near Berlin. The sabotage in Germany isn't an isolated case either, as climate activists choosing public disruption as a means of protest has been on the rise across the West, from North America through to France and the UK.
In the so-called collective West, people are most aware of climate change, and millions of people are clearly expressing their concern. Of course, eco-terrorism does not apply to all those who are concerned. Most people believe that changes in the law, changes in economy, industry, and so on should take place in an orderly, calm, and as far as possible, gentle manner for society.
Experts are quick to point out the key driving factors behind environmental extremism.
One of the core elements is the protests against industrialization, against capitalism as such, actually, against big techs, technological progress in general. The problem with extremists lies in the form which their action take. And when we take a look at this, what we call here eco-terrorism, they use violence. They are not only ready to use violence, but they resort to violence in order to protest.
In the UK, the now infamous Just Stop Oil group took to the destruction of heritage art and architecture.
Did not get the vote by voting.
As a means of raising awareness about the impending climate catastrophe caused by fossil fuel drilling.
When your government literally issues licenses that they know are a death sentence for millions of people around the world, we have a duty as ordinary people to rise up in resistance against them.
5 Just Stop Oil activists have been sentenced in 2022 for public disruptions, which begs the question of how Germany might deal with the Berlin attack. Experts note, however, that preventing these types of incidents is not just a question of jurisdiction alone.
You cannot really counter it only with military or law enforcement means. You need to ensure buy-in certain of us, of the societies, and this should be also a vital component in our counterterrorism efforts in Europe.
For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
He's 99 years old and believed to be the oldest working professional in Poland. But Wacław Milewski's workshop keeps ticking over. And when asked how he's kept going for so long, Milewski has a simple answer. I'm like an old machine. Konrad Gorlinski reports.
Wacław Milewski is still firmly at the controls of his workshop after over 80 years and still shows no sign of slowing down. Now 99 years old, he's believed to be the oldest still working professional in Poland. Ask Mr. Milewski how he's feeling, and he'll answer with the wit of a man who knows his trade well.
Like an old machine. As long as it runs, it runs. When it breaks down, it's over.
In theory, he should have retired 34 years ago, but he's still going and providing jobs for younger people, too. He currently employs an assistant who's only 70 years old, a youngster by comparison. Wacław started working at the age of 14. 5 years later, he opened his own workshop producing machine parts. He was a motorcycle racing champion and built his first motorbike as his first machine entirely by himself.
I did everything myself. The first machines, the lathe, everything.
During the German occupation, he even crafted wedding rings.
Wedding rings from German 10-mark coins for couples getting married. We had to do things like that in those days.
For Wacław, work has always been the driving force in his life.
He still runs this place. Working here in the workshop every day is what keeps him going. He has to think up new projects and then make them happen.
And he continues doing so, at least until May, when Wacław says he finally plans to retire at the age of 100.
He'll be 100 in May, and we're keeping our fingers crossed that he'll be able to work until then and keep running the workshop.
Mr. Wacław also has a quiet dream. In the future, when he retires, he'd like his workshop to be turned into a museum so others can admire his machines as he has done over these many years. For TVP World, I'm Konrad Gorlinski.
We return now to our top story, America's attack on Venezuela and what could happen next. Joining me now is Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
Well, an unprecedented 48 hours. To be clear, should we read into Venezuela as an isolated case or as a message to the world that America will break convention, will use violence to get what it wants?
Well, I think this is, there were two things that happened over the weekend. He not only broke all international laws and so on by invading and kidnapping the leader of Venezuela and then announcing that he was going to run the place, but he also issued a threat against Iran to not shoot any of its protesters on the basis that he said we were locked and loaded and ready to go. In other words, he was threatening violence against the Iranian regime. These are two very, very severe, unprecedented actions by Trump. He doesn't usually color outside the lines, so to speak, but in this weekend, he really went to town and in two instances absolutely broke the mold of what it is America is all about. And he took upon himself, the law and abrogated all the norms and diplomacy that have been set down since the Second World War. So it doesn't make him a mad, let's say, runaway horse, but it does destabilize and create a lot of unease around the world, because this is just the beginning of what he is going to do geopolitically.
And we've heard much about this, speaking of geopolitics, of this 19th century Monroe doctrine in recent weeks. President Trump now saying, wait a minute, it's the Donroe doctrine. Are we seeing the United States again seize power and control, not just over its own territory, but over this entire Western Hemisphere?
Absolutely. He's going to do it. And by the way, that's been the tradition in the Western Hemisphere going back to Monroe, who the doctrine was named after. He didn't want meddling around by foreign powers in his neighborhood that might affect the United States. So there were gunboats, there were seizures, there were all kinds of little skirmishes and wars that went on. And now he's just continuing this idea. And of course, it also applies to Canada, where I live. It applies to Greenland, and it applies to all the countries in South and Central America. He is bound and determined to attack the cartels, to attack corruption, and all of those sorts of things. And he's demonstrated with his actions in Venezuela to what extent he's going to go. And I think it's gotten everybody quite nervous in the hemisphere and should get the world quite nervous. Now, what is upsetting, though, is that while he, in the name of helping the Venezuelan people, has arrested and abducted their awful president and his wife, he does nothing for Poland and Europe and Ukraine by kidnapping Putin and putting him in jail behind bars for what he's done. So he's very selective.
Well, the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky saying, quote, if you can do that with dictators, then the United States knows what to do next. Do you see a world where Donald Trump acts with such an aggressive streak when it comes to Vladimir Putin? Or is that just not an option given that Russia has nuclear weapons?
I think the nuclear thing is an issue, but I think also, as we've talked before on this show, Putin has played Trump very astutely by dangling riches in Siberia to him. In other words, don't wreck my economy because, we can do business together once we get this nasty business about Ukraine out of the way. This seems to be something that's sort of held him at bay. But, he can change, he can turn on a dime. And he is getting, more and more fed up with the fact that, he can't stop the war, Russia's war in Ukraine. And I think that's going to lead him to do maybe some more interventionist things. But Russia, he's staying pretty carefully away from. However, it's important to note that the two countries whose sovereignty he just trampled this weekend, Venezuela and Iran, are both Russia's biggest allies. So, I think Putin should be wary.
And both Russia and China, of course, coming out against the arrest of President Maduro, calling for international law to be respected. Both, of course, have vested oil interests in Venezuela, but both are also regarded as having violated or undermined the UN Charter themselves, of course, in Ukraine. In your mind, is that hypocrisy in black and white?
Totally hypocrisy, but I say it's also hypocrisy on the part of Trump to liberate the Venezuelan people from their horrible leaders and not liberate Ukraine from Putin's tyranny. I mean, he's broken every law, every rule, and, he's just playing Trump for time. But, the good news is that I think that 2026 may be the year that Russia goes bust.
Well, I want to ask down that track, because if we come back to oil, Venezuela holds the largest oil reserves in the world. How much leverage does President Trump now hold when speaking with Russia? I mean, could he squeeze the Kremlin to such an extent that Vladimir Putin is forced to sign a deal?
Well, there's no question. The Venezuelan oil, which, by the way, is mostly untapped because it's been neglected, and it's very hard. They have to spend billions of dollars to get it out of the ground. However, it's also important to note that Saudi Arabia and Canada have as much oil as Venezuela. And, Canada is in the pocket of the United States. I mean, they supply most of the oil to the U.S. And Saudi Arabia does too. But the point about whatever oil Venezuela has been selling has been 100% going to China. So this gives him some more leverage over China in terms of trade matters and so on. It also will give him some leverage if he decides to fully develop it in the next 2 or 3 years and flood the market with oil, pushing down Russia's prices, which will bring about its bankruptcy more quickly.
Now, I spoke to former US Ambassador to NATO Kurt Volker last night, who told me a lot of countries will be recalculating, that Donald Trump is often seen as isolationist, but that this attack is anything but. What will officials in Beijing, in Moscow, and of course elsewhere be recalculating right now?
Officials in all countries, or?
Well, specifically in Moscow and Beijing, but any country that feels threatened by Donald Trump.
Well, arguably, Canada's threatened by Donald Trump. I mean, he's insisting we become part of that country, but Canadians don't like their lousy healthcare system, their crime rates, and their gun laws. They have no interest whatsoever, but we get along very well. There's no reason that Canada's done anything that's upset Trump. However, there could be, because he's now insisting on massive influxes of Canadian cash to help pay for his Golden Dome and other military stuff. So that may end up in a showdown. Mexico, I think, is next on the hit list. Mexico has a cartel crime and corruption problem that it can't cope with. And I would venture to say this year, Trump will, in light of the Venezuelan situation, I think he will end up with sending American troops or special ops into Mexico to stop the cartel and the fentanyl production.
When it comes to Moscow and Beijing, then, has America lost the moral high ground? That if Xi Jinping takes Taiwan, even if Vladimir Putin strikes into the Baltic states, that America has no right to say, well, you shouldn't do that?
Well, nobody has, I guess, technically any right to say anything. But, in the world we have now, big is important. And there's nobody bigger economically, militarily than the United States. He just captured Venezuela and absconded with his president and first lady to put them on trial in a court under U.S. law in a matter of hours. This is the hegemon. This is the big boy. And, Taiwan is also an interesting situation, but, I don't think that China is going to fool around with Taiwan, nor do I think the United States cares that much about Taiwan. One of the things that's happened in recent times since Trump came to power is that the most important asset in Taiwan is the Taiwan Semiconductor Company. It is the biggest chips company on the planet and the smartest. And they have agreed to relocate their operations out of Taiwan to South Korea and to the United States and to Japan. So you can see what's happening there. That doesn't mean Taiwan is being abandoned, but it means that Taiwan is less of a prize to China or anyone else than it was before. So there's all kinds of maneuvers going on economically in addition to the military situation, but nobody is stronger than the U.S. at this point. So, he can kind of do what he wants to do.
Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
And that's all for World News Tonight. Do stay with us here on TVP World for more. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.